I'm Mary Jane Riel. I'm from the Philippines.
So is your country secular?
If by secularism you mean the separation of the church and the state, ever since I can remember, the church has always been part of our political life, of our politics.
For instance, what?
Yeah, in the 1970s, I remember when I was a child and I was studying Catholicism in a convent, and part of it was about the liberation theology, which was part of which the religious have taken on as a struggle against the dictatorship of Marcos. And it had appeared relevant for many people because it was a struggle for, to get out of poverty and to try to change the class structure in society. And so a lot of the progressive, I don't necessarily mean left, but progressive people could identify with that ideology. And then, February 1986 could not have happened non-violently if not the Catholic Church.
What is February 1986?
So this is when we basically had what we call the EDSA Revolution, which is the time when we took to the streets, and there were so much people that Marcos couldn't do otherwise. He had to flee the country and to leave and to go to Hawaii. So that whole mass mobilization happened because the church were calling in the radio for people to go out and to be in the streets and to show their stand against the dictator. And I could remember the films, the images on TV were these nuns lying in front of the tanks and saying the rosary and praying, and we would have novenas upon novenas, broadcast on radio and TV, and people should pray them to, for deliverance and something Catholic about it, of course. So that's how I've remembered our country ever since I was conscious, I was politically conscious. There was not a moment that I could remember that the church wasn't part of our politics. So, in that sense, I don't think it is secular at all.
But your church is a progressive church, right?
To a certain extent, I wouldn't subscribe to that position completely, because of the intervention of the church into our political life. We don't have divorce. We are one of the 3 or 4 countries left without divorce in the whole world. So we don't have divorce. We clearly stated that marriage is between man and a woman and couldn't be any other form. There is no way we could get abortion to be a matter of choice.
What about contraception?
Contraception that's interesting because the previous president, Fidel Ramos, was a Protestant. So during his time, he actually espoused for, at the very least, let's use condoms, and he appointed a health minister who popularized it, and it became the whole of the country. We had, jingles and songs and slogans about, condoms is in. And then under this new president, Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, and before, she is feeling so threatened politically because of the threats from the left who want to impeach her, the threat from the military who holds coup occasionally, and so she clearly knows that if she wants to stay in power, she has to be able to win the church to her side. And so now we're back to natural means of contraception and nothing else. And so we have a population of 70 million in the Philippines. There's 7 million in Manila, and it goes to 8 million during data. It's just beyond our capacity to support this population, but we don't advocate for contraception at all because it is against the Catholic Church. So they've defined much of our lives. So what is progressive really? Progressive should be when I, as a woman, am able to exercise autonomy over my body, and I don't feel I could do that within the Philippines. It's always it's progressive in terms of some of this political stand, but it stops to be progressive when it involves women's bodies. And I'm not just saying women's bodies, it's the dominance of men over everyone else, because the Catholic Church is it's a patriarchal institution, and so is most of the other religious movements in the Philippines, because there are some new ones as well, which I can tell you about. So they're mostly run by men, and they're patriarchal institutions. So it's all about domination over the women, over gays, over lesbians, over transgender. I mean, I've met this woman who was telling me that it seems like we are progressive because we've accepted gays. My impression is that we've accepted gays to the extent that they made themselves successful in the entertainment industry. They're highly talented artists, so we've taken them in. But I'm not sure, once we start asserting sexual identity and orientation as a right, what would be the reaction of the population. We have a bill pending in Congress on non-discrimination on the basis of sex, basically to look at LGBT or lesbian, gay, transgender, intersex rights. But it's been sitting there for 6 years and it's not going anywhere. So no, I disagree to say that the Catholic Church or the religious movement in the Philippines is progressive to that extent. I think it has its own interest that it tries to protect in the whole dynamics in the country.
What about the programs in the school system? Is it highly influenced by the church? First of all, do you have secular schools?
Yes, we have secular schools, because I've been to 2 types of schools. When I was in my primary school, I went to a Catholic school, and then for high school, for secondary school, I went to a public school because it was less expensive. And there's a marked difference in terms of what is taught in those 2 schools, in the sense that when I was in the primary school, we observe all of the religious holidays. We have masses every month for our class.
Yeah.
And then, the whole Catholic system, religion is integrated into the school life, which doesn't
because
happen.
it was a religious school.
Yes.
So in the state school, are you taught about religion at all?
No, we're not.
Okay.
And we've kept that so far. And that's fine. But what is disturbing now is that so there were some critics on the Catholic Church, so we have this born again movement. Born again, I'm sorry. I call it born against, but anyway, it's born again. So a born again movement that has a huge following, because I don't know, at the very basic, I think it has so much songs and dances, and you have such a good time that people go to it. I remember my aunt, who's desperately poor, and for her it gives her a sense of comfort even for the hour that she's there. Okay. So I was saying about the born again movement, it has grown in the last maybe 10 years or so, and it has a huge following in the Philippines. And what is so interesting about this movement is, one, it has just every Sunday, or I don't know what the day that they converge in this huge Coliseum. Stadium, yes, in a huge stadium, and it gets filled. So they have all of that. All of the candidates for senators were adamant that they should be endorsed by this born again group, because that's an assurance that you would win the elections. And it's so true. If you get endorsed by them, they will deliver the votes. And they've also filled their own party list candidates, because in our Congress, we basically have 50 seats reserved for sectoral representatives initially, and then it became seats for sectors that are not in the traditional parties. So anyone can form a party, and then they can they can run for elections, and if they get a certain percentage of the total vote, they will get elected. They won. They're one of the top. They're one of the top parties that won in the recent election for Congress. So they are getting increasingly into the political systems formally. And related to that is that the Catholic priest has run and has also won the elections. Aside from this born again, there's also another religious group, the Protestants. No, that they're not Protestants. The Iglesia ni Cristo, which is another sect, religious sect, and they also deliver the votes. So all the believers in that sect gets a list of who should they vote depending on who is endorsed by their leader, and they actually vote for these people. And so if you're endorsed by these religious groups, you're more or less assured to win, because they're the ones that, one, would get their people to commit to vote for you, and two, will actually go to the polling places and vote, because there are also vote buying that happens in the Philippines, but sometimes you're not sure whether the person whose vote you bought actually goes to the polls and do it. But for these religious groups, they're so systematic and consistent about it. For the past 3 elections that I've followed, they've delivered. So people want to be endorsed by them.
What kind of political measures do they push for, or what are the consequences for women?
I haven't seen. This is the first time that we'll have them in Congress, so it would be a good thing to look for. What type of legislative proposals do they have? And I don't know. I mean, I'm not so optimistic that they would actually look after women's interests. I mean, for me, there's nothing about faith once religion becomes public. Religion that is private, it's about faith. But once it's public, it becomes power and it becomes politics.
Yeah.
So there is no way to deceive yourself and say that that this is about belief and this is about God and it is about heaven. No, it's not about that. It's about different interests being at play in the political arena, and they're going to be one of the strong players in it. But we haven't looked at it as that, because we have lived and breathed Catholicism since the Spaniards conquered us 300 years ago. So I think many of the people don't make that distinction between religion as a belief to religion as a political force. And that's where the danger is, because unless you discern that, then you'll follow blindly. You just extend your faith blindly into the political arena, and then what do you get? You empower people that will not empower you or look after your interests. So I don't know.
What is the attitude of the left in general vis-à-vis secularism and vis-à-vis these forces? Would you call them fundamentalists or not?
For me, fundamentalism always have a violent connotation to it, which they haven't done. But there are other forms of. It's fundamentalist in terms of it's a denial of the basic rights that I would want to have as a woman. So it's fundamentalist in that sense. What was your question?
What is the attitude of the left vis-à-vis these movements?
The left have what they have. Any alliance that they have with someone else who's not part of their ideological group, they call it a tactical alliance. Now, I cannot anymore distinguish between what is a tactical alliance and what is sleeping with the enemy. I mean, I'm not sure. Because, for example, when we tried to oust President Estrada, the president before Gloria Capagal Arroyo, there was a broad coalition between the left, the Catholic Church, the business, etc. So they've worked with these people. I mean, I haven't seen any strong or definite resistance to them to begin with. And it's also because there is a history of collaborating with them with liberation theology. So
yeah.
That have mixed with the struggle of the communist groups in the 1960s to 70s. So.
Would you want to add something regarding the Muslim groups, which of course are marginal, not as important as all the Christian groups?
Not as important, more of because I don't know much about them, because they are most of the Muslim population is in the south of is in the south of the Philippines, and their struggle has always been mixed with a call for independence. So it first initial and Liberation Front, and then there were splits among them as well, and then there's these allegations that some of them are part of the Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and all of that allegation. So it's more complex, I think, the issue of the Muslims, and it's not something that I have truly understood. So
do you know anything at all about what are the consequences on women in the Muslim community?
I don't know, because what is those that are getting into the media are basically activists within the Muslim religion. So like Sisters in Islam, they are struggling with it, but without denying their identity. So and in their articulation of what they stand for, I'm not so clear about where they make the break between the oppressive manifestations of a religion and those that would be essential to keep within you because of your identity as a Muslim, but also keep your integrity as a woman. I mean, I'm not so clear about to what extent is it just supporting the religion, or to what extent is it actually also questioning it, so that you can maintain your integrity, your self-integrity.
Is there a status for secular people in the Philippines, or are you automatically put in under a religious label? Can you say I have no religion and you don't tick any box?
No, no, because one, I mean, if there is a box, there will always be a box. They will always put these religions, and even if you get treated in the hospital, they ask it, what is your religion? I don't know, maybe because of what to serve you in terms of food. I'm not sure. And as I told you, I mean, people don't question this as it's not an issue. It's like, you're the weird one if you want to be secular, because everything else is defined by religion in this country. So,
is there an awareness amongst feminists of the need for secularism?
There is a growing awareness of it, but it's not easy. It's not easy because I mean, at the same time that there's a rise to question the impact of religion on women and the fundamentalist aspects of it, there's also a group or a different type of feminists that also are into the interpretation of religious texts, are also into their feminism in Catholicism, or their spirituality, rediscovering a different type of spirituality that could accommodate religion and feminism, which I haven't really looked into. I mean, that's also a big group, because many of the for example, for many of the feminists, they're based in institutions, and many of these academic institutions are Catholic institutions. So yeah, so it's not as easy, and it's complex, and that's why we're divided among it as well. I mean, we cannot have a full united front on these issues in the Philippines. I haven't seen that as a unifying call for secularism. Maybe we have to reframe it a different way if we want to be united on it.
Well, thanks. That was really
I don't know.
very interesting. But is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to add to what you just said on the Philippines?
I'm just bothered because I will see that the religion will be, with the current trends, will be more formally integrated into our political system. And because we haven't talked about it in a context of secularism versus fundamentalism, we will not probably be able to heed the warning signs of this development. and the fact that even among us as feminists, we haven't had a consolidated stand against these developments will also be worrying and difficult because it's so complex. I mean, we're not united on LGBT issues, we're not united on violence against women, so I mean, and then you add this complexity, so it's not going to be an easy struggle for us.
You just spent many years in Thailand. How many years?
6 years, maybe.
6 years? Do you want to say anything about what you have seen in Thailand regarding the rise of fundamentalism and the question of secularism?
I don't know, it just bothered me. I mean, I'm not so comfortable about talking about Thailand compared to the Philippines because I've just lived there for 6 years and I don't speak the language enough to understand political nuances in the country. But just from reading the newspapers, I mean, there was, when the violence in the south of Thailand has been escalating, and it's actually, again, like the Philippines, a predominantly Muslim population, there were ways that the conflict has now been framed between the Buddhists and the Muslims. And there were even calls to arm the Buddhists so that they could be able to, fight with the Muslims who are considered violent and who have been blamed for a lot of the bombing and attacks in schools, etc. So that's one of the development. It's now being framed as a religious conflict more than as the Muslim initially put it forward as an issue, as a development issue. They were not as similar to the Muslims in the south.
In the
Philippines, getting as much attention from the government in terms of resources, development agenda, etc. So it was more of, we became poor because the national government ignored us. That was how it was framed initially, and there was a study around it actually in terms of how languages have excluded a lot of these groups in terms of the formal education system, and this has led to not giving them the other options out of poverty. So that was the whole, that's primary, I think, the reason for the conflict. But now they're putting a religious spin to it. And then recently, because Thailand is now drafting its new constitution, because after the coup, the military government repealed, I mean, they say, of course, then the old constitution will no longer be in effect because it's a military government in place, and then this is a benevolent military government, that's what they're saying, so it aims to get out of power as soon as possible, and to do that they have to enact a new constitution. And in the drafting of this new constitution, there's a huge demonstration by Buddhist monks who actually want to make Buddhism as a national religion and to write it into the constitution. So, and
to exclude, therefore, the
Muslims, yeah, and yes, I mean, implicitly this comes out from this violence as a reaction to this violence in the south. They're thinking that if they assert Buddhism more, they're going to solve this problem. They will not. They'll actually escalate the whole issue and make it more violent because they're not allowing any other space for non-Buddhists. So, I don't know. I mean, it's alarming development, I think.
And it's really interesting for women in Europe to hear something which is so different from the sanctified image of Buddhism.
Yeah.
This is acting as a political force. Just like any other religion.
No, yeah. Any religion that gets out, as I told you, once it's beyond, it gets out of the private, it is a political force. There is no mistake about that. We cannot subscribe to this religion anymore when it becomes public on the basis of faith. We have to engage it on the basis of intellect. We have to understand it and not just blindly believe it in that context when it becomes political.
Do you know anything about the situation of women in Thailand vis-à-vis Buddhism? But are any of their rights curtailed in the name of religion?
I don't know, because I have some discussions with some women human rights defenders who have faced not attacks in the graphic sense, but basically who are not who do not accept support for their advocacy on reproductive rights and on sexual rights issues, and they operate within. These are groups that are based in Bangkok, so they operate within a predominantly Buddhist Buddhist context. I haven't heard them articulate it vis-a-vis whether this non-support is is related to Buddhism or not. They haven't made that link, and I'm not sure whether that is a link that they would want to make at the moment.
Okay. Do you witness, both in some areas in Thailand and of the Philippines, this visible number, growing number of women who veil in Muslim areas when it wasn't traditionally done some years ago?
Again, this population is from the south. It has more to do. It's interesting because when you look at it first, it's more of the veiling is an assertion of, as we've discussed it in feminist circles, of marking your identity. And in a context of conflict, there is more pressure or not motivation. There's a reason for you to state that identity physically.
As an oppressed group.
Yes, exactly. And for them, I mean, wearing the veil is that assertion. It's that public and physical assertion of that identity. And of course it is linked to, you cannot wear a veil if you're not a Muslim and you don't believe in Muslim precepts. So it is related to religion. So it's again an intensification of identity politics.
And also subsuming women's rights to the group's rights, to the minority rights.
Yes, I mean, that's our view of it, but it's best to get it from them, because maybe they also, I don't know, maybe they would say, I mean, this is our rights, including, this is what women's rights is all about. If there's nothing subsumed about it, I would feel subsumed in that context, but I don't know how would, a Muslim woman within that context feel. Maybe it affirms her womanhood more or less. Yeah, I think it's there. I have my positions on it, but I would not want to impose it at this point, since I don't know much about the situation.